Planning and Zoning Commission for the Village of Vernon Hills. We need to start with a roll call.
Chairman Morris.
Here.
Mr. Ballou.
Present.
Ms. Cotton.
Here.
Mr. Hesner.
Here.
Mr. Heidner.
Here.
Mr. Mulcrone.
Here.
Mr. Gorog.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. This evening we have consideration for a public hearing of case 1402 filed by NRG Acquisitions LLC, Centrum Properties, for pursuant to Appendix C, approval of a special use permit to allow for the development of a multi-tenant commercial building for general retail sales and medical office building. Secondly, approval as a special use permit, certain variations. Thirdly, preliminary and final approval of site and landscape plans. And lastly, preliminary and final approval of the architectural elevations and signage plans. The particular property is 850 North Milwaukee Avenue at the northwest corner of Milwaukee and Town Line Road, and it is zoned B1 General Business District. Who is going to speak on behalf of the petitioner this evening?
There'll be a couple of us, Mr. Morris.
Okay. The main rule we have is you have to speak from a microphone, either permanent or the handheld ones on the table.
I think we'll take turns. My name is Larry Powers. I'm with Centrum. John McClendon, one of the co-owners of Centrum, is with me. Howard Hirsch is our architect. Fran Fazio, civil engineer, and Bill Ferguson, landscape architect.
Okay. Anyone else, or just is that your?
Nope, that is it.
That's your network this evening. To make it easy, if everybody could step forward, we'll swear everyone in at once. Okay. Right. You have one more friend. We ask you raise your right hand and swear or affirm that this testimony you're about to give before this commission of the Village of the Vernon Hills shall be the truth.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. You're on, Mr. Powers.
To begin, I'd like to start by thanking John, Mr. Kalmar, and the staff for their generous time since we started discussing this project last August. And in fact, just for a little history, this is a project that, a piece of property that I've personally been working on for almost 9 years in my prior life with Westfield as a developer there. So it's a site that has long been, in my mind, as one that's underutilized. We've introduced our team. I think, for the most part, the focus tonight is on the architectural, landscaping, and maybe some civil discussion. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Howard to kind of walk through our plans. With that, Howard.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Howard Hirsch, principal with Hirsch Associates from Chicago, and we are the architect and land planner for the project. We put together a sort of modified presentation from the package that you have just to give a sort of overview of the site and to touch upon the issues so that we can be able to better answer your questions as we move forward. So just to orient ourselves, the subject site is at the northwest corner of Milwaukee and Town Line Road. It is, in a sense, the corner outlot for the Hawthorne Mall. It is surrounded on the north by a restaurant and on the west by a small retail building. Directly across the street and continuing down Town Line Road in all directions are a series of strip centers with outlots. And that is the primary nature of these areas, a retail and slight office type environment. Looking at the site in particular, currently there's a 2-story office and bank building located sort of smack dab in the middle of the site that is surrounded by parking. Access is completely off of the ring road for Hawthorne Mall, and the building is set back with parking on the street sides as well. The plan that we're proposing is to provide 2 buildings on the site. One of them at the southwest corner is an 18,000 square foot single-story, single-user building for a medical user, and the building on the north is a multi-user single-story retail building of 11,300 square feet. The buildings have been pushed to the north and west perimeters of the site in order to provide adequate parking on the site and to provide adequate access to the site. We have 147 cars, which meets the requirements for the uses as they are proposed. The variances that we are requesting and that were in the staff report primarily have to do with these setbacks. There is a required setback for buildings along the north property line, basically along the streets at Milwaukee and at Town Line, and along the west property line that we're asking for relief on. When we looked at various plans, and we've been through probably 20 or 25 plans on this site, whenever we tried to move the buildings more into the center, still keep the required landscape buffers along the streets, which we know are very important, we were unable to get a contiguous field of parking that would actually work for the buildings themselves. In addition, pushing the buildings to the north and to the west helped to better define the site and actually open up views to the mall and into the site that previously didn't exist and were blocked by the two-story building that was located in the center of the site. So I'd like to spend a few minutes just sort of talking about each of the individual buildings separately, and then we can move on to some of the overall site items that we have. Just so you know, the access to the site is more or less the same as it was before. There will be no access off of Milwaukee, no access off of Town Line. All the access is off of the ring road located at the northwest corner of the building. The first building I'd like to talk about is the 18,000 square foot medical building for Northwestern Medicine. The building itself is not a lot to see at this point. We're basically showing the core and shell of the building. The show that is basically a rectilinear building with a center entrance facing east. There will be a trash enclosure and a loading area up at the northwest corner. North is to the right on these particular plans. The interior of the building will be laid out by Northwestern. They've not done this at this point, so we cannot present it. What we can do, though, is talk a little bit about what the exterior of the building is going to look like, and I'd like to still talk about it from the point of view of this 3D. And we also tried to make the two buildings, while not exactly the same, relate to each other in terms of their design, in terms of their materials. We do have a material board that's up over there that represents the materials. We are only using solid and strong natural materials. There's no drive-it proposed for this project. The main influence of the design was really trying to emphasize the corners of the building. In locating the site the way it is, the corners of the building take on special consideration because of the fact that they sort of define the streetscape, and then they define the entrance along the curved access road. And we wanted a building that was modern, yet still traditional in its material and in its strength. And so the starting point was with these raised corner elements that occur on all four corners of the building. It's a masonry element. We've used a ashlar stone base with a brown masonry with limestone detailing. The windows are located at the corner, which gives it a bit of more of a modern flair to it, as opposed to having the glass in the center. There is sunscreens that are included on there to give it some interest and some shadow. And that is repeated on all the sides of the building. The center then of the building becomes the entranceway, which is a glacier element that's set back in. It also has a canopy to protect it, and it has a roof element. And the area in between then is being clad in a Renaissance stone in a sort of a red color that complements the brick. We wanted to change the scale, but still keep the strength of masonry material. So we end up with a larger module unit of a 1x2 versus a standard brick, which we think will play off nicely with the windows and with the brick corner elements. The base then wraps the building and ties it all together. The windows are large for this type of a user, with the idea of bringing in some natural light to their exam rooms and to their common areas. The elevations here show the signage that is being proposed, which it conforms to the code requirements. We have a primary sign facing the parking lot just to the south of the entranceway. There will also be a sign located on the south elevation facing Milwaukee on the corner element, and on the north elevation facing the ring road on its corner elements, so that the building can be seen from all the various perspectives. Okay, the retail building is a little bit different scale, but we wanted to pick up the same elements. Again, emphasize the corners because that's the first thing that you see when you first come into the site and when you're on Milwaukee. So we have the same brick corners with the corner glass with the sunscreen element. This will probably be a multiple tenant user. I mean, we don't know for sure. It could be a single user, but we're assuming that it would be up to as many as 4 potential tenants on the site. The area then between the corner towers has been made continuous glass because that give it a little more modern look and to provide visibility into the stores, and it's something that the retail tenants like. And we've included then a fabric awning to give it a little more of a retail feel and to add a little bit of color and life to the project. We also have signage then located on that facade. Both buildings, actually, the parapet section of it has is a metal panel with a horizontal rib to it. And again, that's a feel of trying to get a little bit of more modern materials into the project as well, so that it isn't, while it keeps that modern design feel to it, but the traditional materials, and it gives a bit of a horizontal element and a relief in scale on the vertical height. All the parapets are designed high enough that they'll be screening the mechanical units via the parapet as opposed to any additional screening on the building. Again, the retail building steps along the west property line due to the angle of the site, and the trash is located at the very northwest corner of the building and would be picked up off of a loading area that comes in off of the ring road. There's also exit doors along the north, but yet all 4 sides of the buildings have been treated with windows, the corner elements on all 4 corners. This area in the back, which is hidden by landscaping and also by the building to the north, is really the service area for the building, and we really couldn't put additional windows on that, but it is treated with the same materials as the fronts and the sides. We do show 2 pylon signs, one located at the corner of Milwaukee and Town Line and one located along the Ring Road. This is a variation request that we are asking. The village only allows a single name on the sign. We think it's very important that we have at least 4 names on it for the 4 retail tenants. Again, obviously, if there's a single tenant in there, we would be able to reduce the number. When someone is driving south on Milwaukee, they really can't tell who's in that building until they're past the building. And so it's very important that that sign at the corner catches their attention and identifies who the tenants are. The same with on the Ring Road. If you're entering from the north, which is the primary and one of the primary entrances to the Ring Road, you don't have any idea who's in that building until you get past it. So we feel it's very important to have at least the names of the retail tenants on it. Now, there's also a variation on the size of the sign, and I think that's just an interpretation of the sign the way we interpreted it. If you see the dash line through here, we assume that was the signage area, and that equals the 50 square feet. John, in your staff report, you took it from the frame around, which gets it to 61 square feet. If that's how you interpret it, we would reduce the size of the sign to be 50 square feet. We had no intention of asking for a variance on the sign size. Again, the pylon signs or monument signs, whatever you want to call it, the same materials as the building with the address also located on it, the 850. We do have the landscape plan. I do have the landscape architect here, but instead of making a full presentation on the landscaping, I thought we'd just have him here for any questions that you may have. I think it was in the report, we believe we've complied with all the landscape requirements, whether it be trees, walkway materials, and interior landscaping, perimeter landscaping. We do have some nice landscape areas along the Ring Road as well. So I can leave this up there as a way of sort of keeping the site plan visible. And I guess at this point, we'd like to open it up for any questions that you have. And again, our civil engineer is here as well to answer any questions that may come up on the civil engineering side.
Any questions, anyone?
If your signage on Milwaukee Avenue is intended for Milwaukee Avenue drivers, isn't it facing the wrong direction?
Yeah, it's really supposed to be facing on the diagonal, which is the way we've shown it here.
Yeah, Mr. Heidner, it has 2 benefits. As Howard mentioned, southbound Milwaukee traffic, but also eastbound Town Line traffic. Given the location of the northwestern building, which is tight to the road, there's actually a very short sight line as you're heading eastbound on Town Line. So we do think that retail building, we've gotten this feedback from retailers, it's perceived as setback and not as visible as you would think, given the strength of the site.
And again, this drawing does not have all the landscaping shown on it. It's just sort of a architectural way of showing the buildings in context with each other.
And on your multi-tenant building, since you may have as many as 4 tenants in there, your distribution of the handicap parking is skewed to the one side. Would you address that with, depending upon the number of tenants you're going to have?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
No tenant's going to want all of them in front of their store, so we would spread them out.
Is Northwestern relocating from somewhere else?
They do have a couple locations in the market, in Libertyville, I believe, that,
Aren't they also in the village? What's over in front of Sam's?
They're in front of Sam's.
So you don't know what facilities they're vacating?
no, and I'm not at liberty to really speak for them in that regard.
What other things have you considered for this site? To me, this is a really important site to Vernon Hills, to Lake County, and to the mall. It's kind of the gateway to Vernon Hills and to our community, and I think it needs to be more of a destination for someone and not regular retail strip mall. I have concerns with just the approach of a large parking lot on the corner. There's not a lot of green space. The architecture, I appreciate the modern edge to it, but those could be anywhere. I mean, why this corner? What's the attraction for residents? This is a very prime location, and
I understand.
concerns about any kind of retail there. I don't know how that is a good perceived image into our community of just regular retail.
In terms of the other uses that we contemplated for this site, we actually, Howard, could you go to the landscape plan, because I think it's a good speaking point here. We did not pursue this site with Northwestern Medical Office in mind. We actually had a different user in mind. But ultimately, a lot of the retailers we pursued, which I can't name by name, but they're all the type of retailers that you want to see in Vernon Hills that are at Northbrook Court or Old Orchard or Oakbrook or what have you. The type of tenants that I thought would be ready for this market are not ready. And there was no interest from those larger, call them 15,000+ square foot retailers. We're also restricted to restaurant use based on the project that's happening next door, and our desire to work, hand in hand with Westfield as opposed to in an adversarial manner. So we did pursue other uses. We think this is a great use. We think it's a complementary use to the market. Northwestern customers are going to cross shop. We have 18,000 feet here that's not competing with strip center space across the street. We think that's a good thing. And in terms of the site plan and the parking field that you mentioned, if you look at this plan, we actually initially, when we sat down with John, we had a totally different site plan where we adhered to the building setbacks of 60 feet. And what we had was buildings that were kind of smushed into the center of the site with parking around the back, which might have been useful for employees, but it was way overparked for that purpose. And it didn't open up any sightlines into Westfield, into Hawthorne. And that's one of the benefits. It might be a carryover from my experience at Westfield, but the fact that you're at this main intersection and you can't see the mall is crazy. I think that the mall is clearly the anchor to this shopping district, and it should be visible. It's good for them, but to be candid, it's good for us too. I think the relationship to the mall makes this site stronger. And so by stretching out the site and pushing the buildings back, we've tried to enhance those sight lines. That was a deliberate effort. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah, I just, I mean, there's no like anchoring element to the architecture of the buildings. They're very flat, they're very planar. There's nothing that really pronounces the corner as, you know, as a destination element. There's, you have these low towers, but there's only a foot or two in elevation change on the corners. The main focus of this, if you look at the perspective, is your sign and parking. The buildings are a backdrop to parking, and I think it would be a better situation if there was a green space in front of there that maybe did announce that this is the mall, and maybe the building's a backdrop to that, and the parking is facing the parking of the mall.
Say that last part again, in the parking where?
Put the parking away from the roads.
He's saying pull the buildings to the corner with the green space and then put the parking in the back.
Because if you look at the other corners, there's grade change, there's more green space, and there's a larger buffer than what's being proposed.
I think one of the things that we could look at there, Mr. Mulcrone, would be the corner elements. And one of the things you mentioned was just the height. Didn't seem like there was that much variation at the corners. So yeah, it's certainly something we can look at. If you'd like to see a greater variation on the corner elements, we're definitely open-minded.
Yeah, I actually heard a couple different things, and let me just make sure I understand. One is really more site planning and layout, and the other one is architectural. And in site planning, you know, quite frankly, you know, a lot of the site planning was dictated because of the use of the property. And I think that, as Howard had explained earlier, you know, we originally would have liked to have done, we had some major restaurant, you know, tenants, which were, I think, pretty outstanding, you know, tenants, but we were precluded from doing that because of a use restriction with Westfield. So that was off the table, and we went another direction. We talked to them about it. We asked them if it was possible. They said absolutely not. And then, so we had to go in a different direction. When we dealt with the two tenants we're dealing with here, they want visibility and convenient parking. And so the traditional, you know, put the building in the middle of an office building, or even a restaurant could handle that, with parking kind of surrounding it. It would work for certain uses, but it wouldn't work for the type of uses that we're having. The healthcare tenant, you know, Northwestern wanted a nice parking field and an easy access and an entrance and visibility, and they want all the parking laid out right in front of them, and so did the retail tenant. The front door, more traditional retailer, you know, facing the street. So that's when we came to the idea of, you know, pushing the buildings back, and that's the need for the variance, and also the benefit of opening up the site. Site planning is tough with these uses to do a radical change, as you might be suggesting, which is really kind of flipping it, or either putting the buildings in the center or flipping it backwards. Because our uses, I mean, our users, quite frankly, you know, we don't satisfy them, we don't have a deal, you know, and so that's part of it, and they are really kind of driving, if you will, the site plan. Architecturally, quite frankly, you know, we're open. I agree with your comment. You know, this is a important location, very, very important corner, distinctive, and I think, you know, it's the first time we're in front of this board. Oftentimes, a lot of villages have, you know, an architectural review board as well as a plan commission. This is combined, and this is the first time we're hearing anything. And I think we can clearly work with different elements. If we could add some direction, or maybe there's a smaller group, or you can give us some feedback now in terms of what you would like to see. We are limited in certain things. Obviously, both our tenants, you know, our tenants want to be on a single floor. So I mean, we are dealing with, you know, rectangles, two big rectangles. But in terms of how, and I think we are, again, we're very limited in terms of how we can, the siting, meaning where the buildings sit in the parking. But I think in terms of architectural style, you know, it can be more traditional, it can be more contemporary, which is the direction of how we're going. The materials, you know, can be more or less, you know, contemporary or traditional. And I think we can clearly work. If we had some ideas and some direction, you know, from you, we'd be happy to accommodate, you know, your view of what a gateway type of location like this, you know, should look like.
Has the amount of square footage, the FAR, been maximized? Are you at the limit right now?
By no means, by no means. Actually, we are reducing the size, even from the existing building, by what, at least 10,000 square feet?
We're going from 55,000 to about 30,000 square feet.
But that was on 2 floors.
Yeah.
I'm footprint-wise.
Footprint-wise, I think we're under it by a few thousand feet. I don't know, Mr. Kalmar, if you know offhand, but I want to say we have between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet of room left, if we could park it.
We are maxed out based on the parking.
I do want to add one more comment, because you mentioned that you were concerned about the uses or the retailers that might be at this corner. We may end up with a retail building that has 3 or 4 tenants in it, but our first goal is to get 1 tenant. And we think there's a possibility that there's a 10 to 11,000 square foot single tenant out there that's fashion or soft goods and is something that's different and new to Vernon Hills. So while clearly Northwestern dominates this presentation, and they're the only ones we're naming, we have every intention of pursuing interesting retailers for the rest of the site. And
But there's no guarantee.
there is no guarantee, no.
What's the use restriction that you referenced? Where does it come from?
There is a covenant that runs with this property that requires any site plan approvals to be approved by Westfield.
Okay, but you haven't told me a use restriction, you told me a site plan restriction. What's the use restriction?
There isn't actually a use restriction. I think John misspoke there. It's a broader, frankly, restriction that requires our full schematic plans to be submitted to the mall owner, Westfield, or whoever it is.
I may have misspoke about that. However, it is true that they are restricting.
Wait, you have to talk to the
restaurant use.
microphone. Wait, you have to talk to the microphone. I'm sorry.
I may have misspoke in terms of the document itself, because Larry's more familiar with it than I am in terms of the technicalities of a legal use restriction. However, because they have approval rights, they have told us that they're not going to approve a major restaurant like the direction we're going in. Isn't that
Right.
correct? So,
Well, that begs the same question. What basis do you need approval for the use versus for the buildings or the site plan? Because we seem to here be struggling with the use among other things, and you've said you've just discarded a restaurant or an entertainment use, but I'm not quite seeing why.
That we started with a different use in mind, is that what you're asking?
Well,
Mr. Moore?
he wants to know what,
Right.
I think he wants to know the restrictions and the controls that Westfield has over the site.
Right. Let's start there.
I think the easiest way to describe it is just it's a simple covenant that restricts what the site plan.
The site plan.
The site plan. It's more of a site plan and what they deem to be reasonable in terms of, your configuration of buildings and how you park the buildings and so on.
Right, that's-
Which inherently, it's kind of an indirect connection to uses, which, restaurants obviously being a use that's parking intensive, there's room for reasonable people can disagree as to how you would park a restaurant and how that site plan would be best configured.
Okay, but there's not a restriction on this specific parcel as to the actual uses. It's anything that the B1 district would permit is a permitted use. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But with that, you've concluded that it is more beneficial to have a 2-building, non-restaurant or non-entertainment use on this parcel. Is that right?
That's correct. I might rephrase it slightly and say that it's not otherwise viable. I think the restaurant plan took the GLA from about 55,000 square feet to about 15,000 square feet.
Okay.
In order to park it per the village ordinance, which worked out to almost 25 spaces per 1,000 square feet.
Okay, right.
So
It's by the
that-
seats, right.
yeah.
I understand. Okay. But when you look at, and I don't know if you have this picture for the big screen?
I don't
No.
have it for the big screen.
Okay, when you look at this one, and you've overlaid on top of your site plan the building setbacks, among other things, to put it in a very colloquial sense, you're substantially outside the setbacks all over the place. And can you comment or tell us why, as Commissioner Mulcrone has pointed out, with this type of site, this is where that kind of zoning variance should be entertained versus, once again, going back to his comments, we should be more within the setbacks to have the greater green space, you know, and a greater entry type of area versus the entry as a parking lot.
I mean, one thing I can comment on there is, we did look at numerous plans with living with the existing setbacks. And the end result was not more green, it was simply buildings in the middle with a ring of parking around it. And so you had parking, in other words, you couldn't make it work from a standpoint because the setbacks were so far away from the perimeter that we had to park around it in order to get the parking counts to meet the requirements. It's sort of like it is today. And so you don't end up with a significantly larger green space. And the reason to push the buildings to the perimeter is there are already buildings to the north, there's already buildings to the west. It groups them together. It takes advantage of the fact that there's access behind those buildings where fire department can fight fires for these buildings. It prevents having these sort of interstitial spaces between them that are, you know, bigger but don't really gain anything to the plan. And so by pushing the setback variations on the west and on the north, as opposed to on Milwaukee or on, you know, towards the corner, actually gives you, in my opinion, a better plan. It certainly gives you better parking from the retailer standpoint. I understand the desire to not have a sea of parking, and, you know, hopefully we can work that out with the landscaping, but it does give the visibility that's also, we think, important to the mall.
With respect to parking, there is a comment in the staff report that there is no cross-parking agreement between this parcel and I think Sears owns its own parking field, so it's probably Sears in addition to the mall. Notwithstanding the fact that there is not a cross-parking agreement, has there been an attempt to get any sort of cross-parking agreement? Because most of us would probably testify, based upon at least apocryphal life in the village, that that part of the lot doesn't really fill.
Yeah.
Ever.
You're absolutely right.
We have, and I don't want to mislead anybody here, I think we may have, the tone of our discussion with Westfield could come across the wrong way. This is an amicable project we're working on with them hand in hand. We have had those discussions, and as you may remember, or may come up in your discussions with them, that shopping center is party to an REA, so any decision they make is not just, it's, you know, it's a Macy's, Sears, JCPenney's on the other side of the mall, they have a say in it, and by the time they get done, you know, collecting $5,000 a month from us, they've given it over five times over to the other department stores in exchange for approval. So it's just, you know, based on my experience dealing with department stores and REA documents, and this one in particular, it's not worth the trouble for them. I did want to, go ahead.
I did want to just have one point of clarification when we were talking about setback, just so everybody was on the same page, is that the setback that we're asking for the variance on is the building. It's not the landscaping.
Right.
The landscaping, we're providing all the landscaping, you know, that's required. We thought that was very important. We didn't violate that at all. The only issue is really setting back the building so there can be a convenient parking field, which is something that's demanded by our tenant.
Anybody else?
Does everybody understand what an REA document is? I'm getting Ms. Cotton. I just want to make sure that you understood. Okay, all right.
I have a couple comments. I want to start with what doesn't currently work on this site. The things that don't work on this site is the building's massive. And it really chokes a lot of view from the corner. It's pretty awful. And so by opening up the corner, I think you've made the first move of trying to alleviate that big problem. And as far as positioning a couple buildings on the site, I have no issues with putting a couple buildings on the site. The thing is, though, it is an important corner. And the parking field on that corner needs to be considered very carefully. If there is a large parking field on the corner, then quite possibly it has to have major landscape elements, something broader, something bigger, something that, you know, sprays water or plays the Star Spangled Banner, I don't know. But it's something that has to have magnitude on that corner, or else it makes no sense at all. All you have to do is look across the street. McDonald's is set way back from the corner, and there's a lot of landscaping on that. And they've gone through a lot of ideas, and they're renovating their facility, and they're changing things. If it's going to be a parking field, it's got to have major landscaping elements, and if it costs parking spaces, it costs parking spaces. It's got to be big and beautiful and nice, and it's got to have elevational elements. It's got to be architectural in nature. As far as the buildings themselves, you know, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but they seem unremarkable for what should go there. I appreciate the application of material, but it's all flat. And even though we're trying to raise the corners as taller elements, it's like a Western town type of architecture, where you have the facades that go up high and the building is really down low. And the stone at the base of it, it's so low you won't see it because of the landscaping at the base of the building. So it's completely hidden. As far as the scale of the masonry and the stone, you know, I can appreciate applications of different sizes of material, but in itself, it's still flat. The stone doesn't come up high enough, or we're not, you know, which glazing elements are clear story, which glazing elements are spandrel, how much visual glass goes into this building, what's appropriate for Northwestern. You know, the architectural components of these two buildings don't have to be rectilinear. They don't have to be. We should never say it has to be. It can be. It may be most efficient that way, but it doesn't have to be. And if that helps us when we're looking at things a different way, well, then it might help us. It may help us with how this is viewed from the corner, and how the landscaping elements could basically tie these buildings together, you know, marry them in a way that that is remarkable. And quite honestly, when you do things that are compelling, you can go a little closer to the road. You can, you know, you can encroach upon that setback. You can do things like that because it's compelling. There's a reason for it. You know, there's a solution there, and it could be a couple buildings, but there is a solution, and I think I know you've thought about this a long time, but there's a better solution there.
Yeah, let me just make a couple comments, and I very much appreciate what you said. I heard there are a couple things which I think are helpful, and we probably could work on. You know, if we can deal with the basic, you know, site plan, if you will, the setback variance, which I think is important in the parking field, which is key to our tenants. I think that architecturally, as I said before, we can go to work and we can come up with, I think, some other solutions. We've done lots of different projects, and you know, and Howard's a creative guy. We've got other ideas, and we can. I think we'll be able to satisfy you because we're willing to do something. We're willing to take the time and the effort to do that. And then I also heard another thing, which is probably a very good idea. It was talked about a long time ago, but we didn't. It hasn't been pursued, which is something more significant at the corner. Okay, so you know that right now I think we have. I don't know if you want to turn back there. There is a little landscaping at the corner and sign, but I agree, it's not remarkable. And let us give some thought to that, because I think something could be done there. It may require a slight parking variance, so we're right at the maximum parking number, but is that right?
Yeah, we're right there.
Yeah, so if we were to take away some parking, and if that's something which you'd entertain, and we may need a slight parking variance in order to do that, we could probably, I think we can come up with some good ideas there too.
You know, and make no mistake, I'm not talking about what they've done in Rosemont, you know? That's silly, you know? Why not? There's a lot of reasons why not.
Opera House.
Well, no, I'm talking about the waterfall and the rock, but we're not talking about that at all. Something classy, something, you know, that rises up but doesn't prevent you from seeing. You know, it's something more compelling for this community on that corner, because there's only 4 of those corners, you know, in this particular area, and there's a lot of people that go by there. It's huge. I know that there's going to be further suggestions by other commissioners, but there is a solution there. It just seems like this is a start, and something could really come of it if you really get after it.
The other thing, I would just ask if anyone is willing to, if you have a site or a building in mind that you think is an example of what you think should be this corner, I'd be very happy to hear that from you, anyone here, and go take a look at it, and not necessarily copy it, but just in terms of the type of features or buildings that you think.
What's your first name?
Howard.
Howard. You know, replication of design. You know, you can take elements and components, but it's got to be yours, man.
No, I'm not suggesting replication.
I'm just, you kind of were. You know, what works in the community, what you like, you know, what's been going on. You know, look at this building here. This is a really interesting building.
It is.
At first, who would have thought? It's a great room. It's a very interesting building. You know, do something interesting. You know, people like to be provoked a little bit. Either they love it or they hate it. But you don't want them to go, gee, I'm kind of bored with that. You know, either they'll love it or they'll hate it. And if they love it, then it's going to be awesome. If they hate it, then at least they'll say that they hate it and they're paying attention to it. Just give it some gas.
Okay. What's your site and building lighting?
The site, I'm sorry, we had submitted a photometric plan. The site lighting is pole-mounted lighting within some along the Milwaukee frontage facing west, and then in the islands themselves. Along the north and west sides, north side of sort of the back sides of the building, or the ring road side, there's some wall-mounted lighting. We didn't anticipate having a significant amount of lighting on the building itself. We have looked at some decorative lighting, but it would only be for decorative purposes. The lighting is covered by the pole-mounted lighting.
Does that contribute and/or detract from the sort of desire that you're hearing from some of the commissioners for this corner? You know, does lighting, or should lighting play some sort of role in it?
Certainly, lighting plays a role in everything. Obviously, if there's a corner element that's been thought through and is more emphatic, lighting would be a part of that design. I don't think necessarily a decorative sconce just sitting on a building,
No.
unless that sconce has an integral part to the design of the building, doesn't really add anything.
Okay. But there's no,
Or if that feature, whatever that
Right.
feature happens to be, ties into something on the building that you want to highlight on the
Right.
building.
okay, but there's no intention to do that? Like, you're not going to light these corner elements or anything that's just by way of example?
At this moment, what we're presenting to you now, no.
Okay. All right.
Quite frankly, I'm not sure that, you know, accent lighting, architectural lighting is really fully developed in our plans. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this plan had uplighting or other things to make it look interesting at night.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
Have we considered, I mean, I'm not sure Northwestern Mutual is the right tenant. Maybe that's part of the problem. or Northwestern, wherever they are.
Medical.
Northwestern, wherever they are,
Medical.
Maybe they're not the right tenant, I guess. And I have to agree with Commissioner Mulcrone for that corner. I think you're looking for something more inviting. And for me, I don't know, is there a repositioning of the buildings completely? Do you bring the building more? I mean, you used to have this big tower building there, the big square or whatever. And do we round it out? Do we look at either underground or semi-underground parking, subsurface parking, somewhere to maybe help alleviate some of your parking issues? I know that's a big expense, but it's a thought, depending, maybe a tenant would be interested. I don't know, it seems like I have a real problem with just all the asphalt. I'm just looking at a parking lot on the corner there, and to me, that bothers me more than the setbacks of the buildings and those issues, so.
Completely agree.
Yeah,
Oh.
go ahead.
Well, I completely agree. I mean, this is probably the busiest intersection in the entire village. And to just have the intersection be a parking lot doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, let me get back to what I think we can and cannot do, so I can be just very frank with everybody. The use, which is you're referring to, quite frankly, we have talked to a lot of people. As I think was mentioned earlier, we've been involved with this project for, I don't know, 6-7 months already. There's lots of users we've talked with. It's an interesting corner, although it's incredibly prominent, and you've got great demographics in your village. Being an outlet so far away from the mall and really detached, people don't walk from the mall to come out here. I mean, it's a physical detachment because it's so far away, and you've got that ring road that acts as a divider. It doesn't really feed off the mall, quite frankly. And there are some number of tenants which we were quite excited about talking with, and we were hoping would have some very interest. And if I mention names, which I'm not going to, you'd say, wow, that'd be a great tenant to have there. Not interested. Absolutely not interested. It's kind of an interesting location as you get into it. The type of tenants which were interested, quite frankly, one of the most important one was healthcare. And healthcare, not just this tenant, but there were other healthcare tenants that were interested in this site. And to be, again, very frank with you, without an anchor tenant, this deal doesn't happen at all. You're dealing with that concrete bunker pillbox, that we have there now that everybody agrees, I think, is not unattractive. It was a bad idea 20 years ago. It's still a bad idea. Is this, is the use a perfect use? If you had to pick anybody, you had to pick someone, it may not be a perfect use, but I think it's a very good use. And quite frankly, I think we can still work with your issues, okay, meaning corner landscaping, attractive feature, making it distinctive, relevant, interesting, architecturally, and with some things happening at the corner. I think we can do that, and I think we'd like to challenge us to do that. We'll come back with something. But it's not going to be something that doesn't have our tenant, who we've, because without that, we can't afford to buy this property. We're not going to just buy this property on spec and build it and think someone's going to come, because we know enough about this property to know what, that there's a lot of users, although it sounds like, hey, you got a great corner, it's incredible, great visibility, a lot of people just don't like it. I mean, it sounds funny to say that.
It's a destination.
Yes.
Okay, it's a destination.
And it's a destination for not a huge tenant. It doesn't have an anchor. Okay, it's 3.5 acres.
Well, it can't be a massive building.
Right.
So you can't have a huge business there. But medical office tenants, they like sharp buildings. They like unique buildings. They have personality, and they like to reflect that personality, and that's why this may be a good corner for that type of use if it's represented properly, and if you can somehow work that landscaping in some kind of multi-elevational way that it ties in with the building, there's lots of ways to synthesize this, And you could bring the building even forward if you synthesized it with your landscaping, you know, it ties it in together, somehow creates those vistas. There's got to be a way to do that that's not mundane. And, you know, you want that because the nicer it is, the more unique it is, the more people are gonna want to be there, even if that major tenant that you're working with right now leaves. Because you're building something that's gonna be occupied by many different businesses over its lifetime. So, you have a great opportunity. And it's tough, it's hard, but if you could, you know, get through it.
You know, I think that, just a comment, you know, we look at parking lots in the village a lot, but I look at this space, and you really can put a building in the center like it is now and constipate the corner, and you don't see anything. I personally like the way this is set up, provided that it is landscaped and maintained. The key is we see lots of nice landscaping in parking lots when they open up. You come back 2 years later and, you know, the weather has killed everything. But I think this can be a welcoming, as you come into the village, I think with proper landscaping and some of the features Scott was talking about, I think would be nice. And I actually like the buildings like this. Again, if you put a building like it is now, you're going to block everything and just see the building. Yeah, we'd all like to have a restaurant there that would be a big name restaurant that everybody wants to go to, but we don't have that. So.
If you have the medical office interest, why throw retail into it?
Well, I think there are just certain economic viability issues. If your question is why not just do an 18,000 square foot Northwestern building, I think there's an economic viability issue as to whether this site should have more on it. And frankly, we're within the FAR, so I think I don't think there's really a concern of density, that we're over-densifying the site or anything like that. And there is demand. So I think that's the primary driver. And I think big picture, if you look at what we're doing, we're taking a building that's obsolete and we're trying to create a viable site plan that's going to last through the rollover of various tenants. And, you know, if you look at putting the buildings in the center of the site, you might get Northwestern to sign off on it. I highly doubt it. But the problem is when they're gone, you're going to have another viable problem, you know, where you have an obsolete building where the parking isn't convenient for customers. So big picture, it seems like that's the way you're looking at it, but you know, I wanted to point that out, that keep in mind that the building that's there now is broken, you know, and we don't want to build another plan that's going to have the same problem in 5 years.
Yeah, and the bottom line, though, really is the economics, just to be straight with your question, is that just an 18,000 square foot building on this site does not work. We needed, again, we're not packing it, maximizing the FAR. When there's a 50,000 square foot building on the site now, we're going down to 29,000 square feet, but it does need that.
Now, Jeff, I just want to make sure that that they're either understanding you clearly. Were you thinking that maybe this healthcare type of use plus other healthcare type of uses?
That's basically my question.
in
I'm questioning
conjunction with it, not just the
why bring it in
18,000?
a tougher use like retail, because that's a hard site.
Okay, we misunderstood your question. I thought you said not have any retail.
Why not have
other
more
building.
medical?
Okay, you know, it's possible that there could be another, you know, well, I guess probably not. I mean, there's probably some non-compete issues with, you know, some of their major competitors of Northwestern are probably precluded from the site. There may be some other healthcare uses that aren't precluded from the site, and we're clearly open to talking with them.
Is the site going to remain under unified ownership, or are you going to sell these buildings off?
We really don't have any plans, and really haven't gotten that far. We're kind of at the first step right here, but it could be sold in two pieces. More than likely not. I mean, more than likely, this is probably a long-term hold for us in our partnership.
So your comment about, or someone's comment about Northwestern not being there that long, or when they move out, what does that portend for us? Is it an 18,000 square foot building on an otherwise retail area?
You know what, I think Larry may have mentioned that, but, or maybe one of the other commissioners, but we're looking at Northwestern being a long-term tenant. They are signing a long-term lease. You know, and it's a, and they have they're an A+ credit, and they're going to honor their lease, and they're going to be there for a long time. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be there forever, but it's a long-term lease that they're entering into.
Okay.
Longer than conventional retail leases,
Okay.
I would say.
Okay. In looking at, I guess it's the soil and sediment control plan, only because I can kind of, with my bad eyesight, read the elevations. Is it correct, though with my glasses I won't bet on it, that the elevation change effectively from the curb line of the street to where this landscaping is going to run, it's a foot or two different, is that right?
Are you talking off of the
Wait,
Ring
wait,
Road? Near the Ring Road? Is that where you're
no,
looking?
no, off of Milwaukee and off of Route 60.
There is a couple of feet drop from the intersection of the road down to the parking lot, yes.
Okay.
That sidewalk is up high.
Okay. So really, when you drive down Milwaukee, this picture that we're looking at now, up there, although this is a little bit obviously above sitting in a car, you are going to look down into the parking lot.
Slightly, yeah.
What does slightly mean?
2 or 3 feet. I mean, it's not like it's 10 feet.
No, but, okay, but certainly...
There's also a landscape buffer there between the two.
Well, that's the next question. In terms of the landscape buffer that we've been talking
Yes.
about and around, does the landscape buffer, is that just plantings, or are you looking to do grade changes too, between the road, the sidewalk, and then the parking lot?
Currently, it's just plantings, a mix of evergreen, deciduous, and ornamental grasses.
Right, and we've seen that, okay.
Right.
Is there a reason why any grade change, or, I know it's a dirty word sometimes, berming wasn't talked about or looked at?
Well, berming would be the opposite of what's going on the site.
Right.
I'm dropping. So for me to berm, we would need more room to go up and then back down. Right now, it's going down. So it's pretty much meeting what's existing there. I didn't want to bring in a lot of fill or anything.
Why?
Well, the more I fill there, the more I have to fill in the back. So I'm kind of stuck. I'm stuck on 4 sides. I've got to meet existing grades on 4 sides of a 3-acre site. So the sidewalks are all there. I have to have handicap accessibility from the one sidewalk up to the building. So I kind of worked different areas different ways, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me to fill that parking lot in the front at the corner.
So will your parking lot be the same elevation as the current parking lot that's there?
Pretty much, yeah.
Using this rendering, I guess it's the April 2nd one that we're looking at, there's that sign that's kind of on an angle at the bottom right corner. Mr. Kalmar was nice enough to sketch out on my plans, but when I will do it for you. What if you take a couple of spaces on either side of where that sign is for some greater, for lack of a better word, element or entry element, or Commissioner Hesner had another word for it, you know, not the Rosemont waterfall, but something akin to maybe the one in Wheeling, which isn't quite as big. Does that give you additional space to do some of the things that we're discussing, or are we still woefully short?
Well, I think there's definitely the opportunity to do that, to increase the landscaping, to add some other elements, some hardscape, maybe some stonework, something that we're trying to mirror some elements from the building and bring that out into the landscape as well, whether it's in walls or other forms. I think we do have that opportunity to do that, and that's one of the things we want to take a look at and review.
Now, if you do something like that, and Mr. Kalmar just arbitrarily drew 2 spaces on either side, which is a total of 4 then, how does that impact the functionality of the parking vis-a-vis these 2 buildings and these projected uses?
Maybe I think it's best to go to the site plan.
Sure.
If we couldn't,
Keep going.
got it? Take me to the landscape plan if you would have.
Yeah, because Yeah, actually, there is more space.
Wait, remember the one rule, you have to talk to the microphone.
Sorry. Actually, there is more space around than that rendering you were looking at originally. This shows here that there's a lot more landscape space around it that we can utilize.
Okay, fair enough, but with respect to what we kind of drew in each
I
other.
think if you were to take a couple spaces there, Mr. Morris, and convert them to landscaping, because it seems after talking for half an hour now that it's pretty clear the corner is the focus. Maybe what we could do is continue to balance the site from a parking perspective by providing 2 additional spaces in the employee lot for Northwestern, which is that lot that's just north of their building, which would enable us to keep the site still balanced from a parking perspective, not seek a parking variance, which is something we don't want to do.
Where do you put 2 spaces there, just out of curiosity? Will you knock the tree out at the corner?
No, we actually would have 1 more on each side of that aisle.
Oh, I see where it's kind of...
You see that sort of dead-end parking condition there?
Oh.
Does this work?
Yes, it does.
Oh, there you go. So we actually, in our last plan, had additional parking there. We took it out, we could put it back and add green space at the corner. I think that's a fine idea.
Bottom line, it's a good idea, and it's something we'll look at. I mean, you know, to add some more landscaping, some more important presence at the corner, take out a couple spaces or more. Let us take a look at it. But I think that the concept and the idea makes a lot of sense, and we can go to work on that.
Yeah, do not talk about 1 space or 2 spaces or even 4 or 5. Come up with a compelling reason, you know, a compelling solution, something that says, hey, this is a great spot. This is a destination location. This is also part of the gateway to Vernon Hills. This is something that's very, very good. Come see us.
I think the conclusion that I'm reaching, and I think John is too, is that we want to take some time here and be deliberate and look at a lot of options and not rush through the design of the elevations, which, you know, to be fair, these have been in progress for 8 months, but, you know, there's work to be done here, and we'd love to get your input, further input going forward. One thing we would like to accomplish today is to reach a consensus on the overall plan and the fact that this is a viable site plan, and that this is a plan that, with elevations and landscaping at the corner, you know, to be approved in the future, the basic massing here can work.
How can you do that? Okay, with all the things that we're talking about right now, how can you come to that conclusion? What we've spoken about is, yeah, the concept has some potential. You know, maybe even the building placements have potential, but to approve a plan, to have consensus on a site plan, I don't know how, it's a great goal, but I don't know how you can reach that goal tonight. I think you can accomplish certain things here tonight, but as far as a site plan approval, I don't think you can get there.
Let me address it slightly differently. I'm in agreement with the sentiment just expressed, but also in agreement with your question and your sentiment that I think what you may be able to leave here this evening with is not necessarily an approval, but something we've done before when we've met with people is an entering and continuing of the request based upon the discussion we've had this evening with the direction that we're kind of looking at. It's hard to do the actual site plan because we're saying, well, we're going to look at this, we're going to do that, and you just can't. You don't know what the site plan is. Like, for instance, the parking we just talked about. I'm now going to say something that's way out of school for me because I'm certainly not an architect as some of my peers are here. And as you probably guess, I'm more of a lawyer based upon the legal questions I asked. Is there a way to look at these buildings and tie it more together? Because you're talking about possibly hardscape at the corner, that these tower elements, I think, as you referred to, Mr. Hirsch, be made out of that stone, which right now just wraps literally the bottom of the building. And does that have an impact that's positive or negative? And I'd ask you, then my two, friends up here. and they'll say, you know, the lawyer doesn't know what he's talking about, which is typically what they say. But
Quote Mr. Hesner there, anything is possible, right?
Well, anything is possible, you know, and that's the beauty of it.
Right.
The only thing is, the hard solutions aren't easy to find, you know? They're very valuable when you find them. But, for instance, giving you instruction to say, hey, you know, maybe you can bring this material into the building, you know, okay. But not necessarily, do we have to say it's on the corners? Do we have to say it's in the middle? Is it in the bottom? You know, is it on an upper elevation, lower elevation? Is it round? Is it square? Is it rectangular? Is it orthogonal? Who knows what it ends up being? It just, right now, you're getting a response from at least this commission that maybe this version isn't what is gonna sail.
I mean, my main thought is, you know, as a developer, as an architect and a landscape architect, this is an amazing opportunity to do something really special as a destination on one of the best corners in Lake County. I mean, sites like this don't come along very often. And I just want to see something befitting that site and the amount of people that come into our town and travel through.
We greatly appreciate the feedback, and the reason just to answer your question, Mr. Hesner, about, how do we get there? And the reason I make that suggestion is that, you know, when the feedback is fairly broad and inspirational, it's going to lead us in a lot of directions, and it's going to take us a lot of time to explore 7 or 8 different options. And, you know, just to take a page out of John's book here, there's only so much time that we have here. And so what we would like to do is have the confidence that fundamentally this site plan is not objectionable. And we have full confidence that we have the creative power and we're willing to dedicate the resources to develop elevations and landscape plans that you will accept and appreciate and love. But the clock is ticking, you know, and I think that's a long time. The process I'm envisioning has a lot more of your input, not just every 2 weeks, but hopefully we can get some sidebars or what have you and keep developing this on a daily basis. But, you know, that's still going to take quite a long time, I think. And so I'm hoping for an accomplishment that is in the near future that might give us the confidence to proceed.
I have a suggestion, but do you have anything you want to add at this point from your standpoint? Okay. This is a public hearing, and as a public hearing, if anyone from the public wants to speak, this is an opportunity to do so and to comment in any way. It's your chance as the public. Okay. Then, hearing that, we'll close the public hearing portion of it for public comment. There could be more later. Let me make this suggestion. In looking at the request that has been made for the various zoning issues and approvals, what you're really talking about are really 2 things. One has to do with the site plan issues and the architectural plan, and the other one has to do with the special use issues. Let me ask this. What I'm going to ask for it's a non-binding vote as to an ultimate decision by the village or this commission. But the first thing is, based upon, you want specific feedback, as a non-binding vote, and I think we can do this, John, the current site plan envisions building setbacks that vary from the zoning ordinance, and the buildings would be within the building, or outside the building setback area. Did I say that backwards, or did I say that? I think I said that right. Yeah. Okay. As a commission, we can do this either by roll call or by
you would just do
acclamation, or
it would be consensus.
Or just consent. We'll do it by consensus. Do we have a consensus? And that doesn't mean a unanimous, or it doesn't mean a plurality necessarily, but a consensus, that a site plan for this site, the setback issue for the building setback, the buildings can be outside the building setback area. Anybody?
Can I ask one question before we...
Absolutely.
Has the fire department reviewed the setbacks and find they're okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it wouldn't get to you before if they didn't.
So what about the setback question, people?
Can they vary from the ordinance?
Do we feel that it was appropriate in viewing a site plan for this parcel, that be a variance?
Sure,
It could be.
sure,
Good, right, because this is non-binding.
sure.
Okay, so there's some direction. Secondly, you've asked for, on a site plan for this site, not a single, but multiple buildings, correct? And
Correct.
here you're talking about two. Do we have a consensus that two, knowing that those buildings could be outside of the building setback, would be something that would be an appropriate site plan?
Can be considered.
Anybody? Okay, so, okay. Baby steps, now we've got two. Third, in terms of the usage of the buildings, do we have a consensus that, I think we have this, that if the buildings were single-tenant users, that would be fine. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. If at least one of the buildings was a multi-tenant user for a use permitted in the B1 district, which is retail's included, we'd be okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, so far, so good? Okay. Next, we've talked about and it's been phrased in all different ways. We used to talk about, Clooney was what was it, the crown jewel. Okay, we won't go quite to crown jewel.
That's across the street.
That's across the street, and that's an inside historical joke you don't want to know about. Okay, do we have consensus that what this site plan, for it to be considered for ultimate approval, I'm going to use something that's very mushy. We were looking for greater impact or greater, help me two architects.
Something
presence, compelling at the corner.
Yes.
Okay, and that could include an increase or a decrease, I'm sorry, I said it backwards, a decrease in the parking immediately adjacent to that corner. I'm talking about,
Yep.
can I hear everybody? Okay, do we have a consensus on that?
Yes.
Okay. In addition then, in talking about the very broad sense, the architecture of the buildings, in terms of first the mass, just the size of the buildings, do we have a consensus with respect to we could approve or consider approval of a site plan with buildings this general size, I'll call it? I guess one is 11,000 square feet, the other is 18,000 square feet? Yeah.
That's right.
No,
This is a smaller footprint than what currently exists, is that not what you
Yeah.
said?
That's correct.
I'm not talking about the architecture, I'm talking
Right.
about just the mass or the size, right, at this point.
The square footage?
Yeah.
I think,
Okay.
absolutely.
Jerry, you're grimacing at me. It's okay.
Square footage I'm fine with,
We're going to get that. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. Square foot? Okay. So in terms of mass, we're okay. Okay. Now let's talk about the specific. The architecture of the buildings has been described all different ways, and probably to one degree or another, all the descriptions have been appropriate or proper descriptions. But the one, if I'm correct, consensus we have is just as we're looking for something a little more compelling or somewhat greatly more compelling at the corner, we're looking to see something more compelling to be able to then grant the special uses for with this architecture. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Now, if I look then at, there were some questions in terms of the approvals you were looking for regarding the sign. Okay, let's give you some input on that. I think you said in terms of the size of the monument sign, even though we were interpreting, you were asking for 61, you're actually withdrawing that request, and you're looking to be within the 50-foot, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, but there is still a request for 4 tenants on the sign versus the typical single tenant that we permit, is that right?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. When we're talking about that, is it this one?
That's the one?
In general nature?
Yes.
Okay, and we're going to not talk really about the particular architecture because that may change, the building changes. You know, if suddenly we have a pink building, we'll have a pink sign. Please don't, but maybe. Okay. Do we have a consensus with respect to the question that they've raised about would the Plan Commission be amenable to considering a multi-tenant sign, I'll call it. Is that a fair description? Anybody?
Where?
Which one are we talking about? You want to just tell us just where we're talking?
There's two of them. There's one at the Ring Road, and there's one at the corner.
Okay, so you're talking, you want to show it on?
Yes. So
That's
there's-
not a variance though, right? The two signs, is that a
No, the
variance, John?
multi-tenant is, right?
We're just talking about the sign square footage will now be not a variance. We're only talking about what's on the sign.
Correct.
Four
The number-
tenants,
the number.
possibly up to four
Yeah.
versus one.
Right. But there'd be two of them, you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay.
But the two isn't debatable
no.
because it's
Right.
within their right to have
Yeah.
two.
But you just want to show us where they are?
It's just 50 feet, and are we going to let them have one name, two,
Not
three?
are we going to let them, would we consider
Yes.
for purposes of
Right.
approval? Because this is all non-binding. Is that, so you're showing where?
Yes, there's one here at the Ring Road. I believe this is right, Howard.
Yep.
And then the one at the corner here.
Someplace down there. Okay. So what about that question?
Well, can I ask a question on
Absolutely.
that? So your tenant for the medical building would not be on any of the signage? And it,
That's correct.
Okay.
Jo-
Okay, sorry.
The ordinance is that they can have one tenant, is that correct? It just seems odd to me that if they're hitting the square footage, who cares if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4? I mean,
That's what the sign ordinance requires.
okay, it just seems odd to me, so.
Yeah, I mean, we've granted variations across the street.
Right, I mean,
for
we've got
multi-tenants.
precedents throughout the
Right.
village, as long as it's not, 500 square feet, I just
Right.
fail to see why it would really matter.
Okay. So
Okay.
do we have a consensus that we would consider for this site, a site plan that would include, and actually it's special use, not technically a site plan, a multi-tenant monument sign that is still within the ordinance's square footage of 50 square feet?
I'm okay with having a multi-tenant sign. I'm just not convinced that that's the right location for
I'm
it.
not saying where.
Okay,
Okay. We're not talking, right, just a multi-tenant sign
On the site.
yeah,
on the site.
on the site
Right.
somewhere.
Because that we can talk about it, right? Okay. Do we have a consensus there? Okay. In looking at the staff report, which I believe you've received a copy of, I
Yes.
think, have I missed anything that was really you were looking at? Well, one was the off-street loading requirements. Is that something we really need to discuss this evening or we can talk about later? You want, it's probably not critical, I'm guessing.
I don't think it is critical. I mean, I think the only issue that we had, quite honestly, was that the north multi-tenant building, if a truck was to park in there for whatever reason, hang the cab out into the outside drive aisle for Ring.
And
So-
that would be more of an issue if they had one large tenant versus 4 small.
Most likely, you're right, right.
Okay. Okay. Does that give you, not a warm fuzzy feeling, but does that give you some of the more specific, on an item-by-item, I'll use the word direction, but I use that a little bit guardedly because, as we pointed out, we're really not in the business of designing, though we sometimes try to, that helps you move forward. Because I should point out, and I think you realize this, is that our intentions here are not to prevent development or prevent progress, but to accommodate development and progress for the betterment of the village, both its residents, which we are, as well as those that visit. So hopefully you're not viewing this as being something that's obstructionist, but more we're looking as partnering, with.
Well, and with that, when that occurs, it usually turns out very well for the group that joins the village, so.
And can I ask a question, John? Can they work with staff on this in some manner? I mean, petitioners routinely work with the village staff
Oh, yeah.
on issues. I mean, I can see where you might be thinking, okay, you've got great ideas here, we're all over the place, and now you've got to go and
Well,
come up with something.
Yes, we can. I guess my suggestion would be is maybe a couple commission members would be willing to assist as a part of that or look
think
over
that's a
things
great
and
idea.
provide some comments with regards to that too.
I think that'd be a great idea. I don't know if we've done that in the past, but
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
Jeff has helped us in the past. Scott's helped us. I mean, maybe we could do that again, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me tell you where we are. You are left with the proverbial fork in the road. And there are two options, or two roads we can go down this evening. Option one is that we can, with what you've heard, we can enter and continue for additional consideration and then voting on a, I'll call it a revised, whatever revised means, plan. Or option two is, and this is up to you because it's your right, we can vote on the specific request you made this evening, and that will then go to the village board with our vote.
Yeah, if I
And
could
I'm not
respond.
telling you how we would vote because I do not know, but that's a decision you have to make, not us.
I think it's a simple decision.
It's your decision, not
We'd like to
mine.
do the former. We'd like to work with you. We'd like to create a better plan. I think we've got some really good ideas that came out of this, and we can roll up our sleeves and go to work. And I also do appreciate the feedback you've given us.
Okay.
It's, it's good feedback, and we're good listeners, I think. And what we'll also do is that the one thing which I think would be very helpful, and I heard a couple people say it would be a good idea, is that if we have a little bit of interaction here, we're going to come up with some ideas, sure. And and we'll have we get some feedback. That'll make our next meeting real productive, we hope, and that would be great.
Okay.
So, thank you very much.
Okay, so don't go too far. What I would do is, you are probably aware of this, thing Mr. Powers. We have a standing motion to approve in this commission, so there would be a motion to approve not the request, but to enter and continue this request for special use permit, as we described, and preliminary and final site, landscaping, architectural, and signage plans to a date that we would set, with you. Okay, and we need a second for that. Second. Do we have any discussion on entering and continuing it?
Yeah, and I think
John?
you're also continuing the public hearing.
Oh, I'm
because
sorry.
we have not
Yes.
closed the public hearing.
Because they have to come back. Well, we did for tonight, but then we have to reopen it. That's right, you're
Well,
correct.
the public testimony part of
Yes.
that can be reopened, but
Right.
the hearing itself has not been closed.
Good point, yes.
And I guess my other suggestion is we probably need, with that element, part of this, to continue this to a date certain.
Okay. So what kind of
I'd
time
like
are
to
you looking
request
for?
the next plan commission.
We meet on a
When you
ad
want
hoc
us.
basis, so. So the next one,
I mean, we could set it as early as April 16th, but that assumes that your team is going to be able to get things together and get moving to put pedal to metal. And then the ability to have the two commissioners and myself help with regards to that. It's going to be real tight because, I mean, I'm going to be selfish. I'm on vacation the next 5 days or 6 days. So, and my new assistant will have to wear in on this really quick. So from that standpoint, so I mean, we could look at the 16th and come back with as much as we can. And if we don't get it all, we can roll it to the next week or something like that too.
what
So,
works for you?
so if you want to do the 16th, we can do the 16th.
16th is great.
Are you guys okay with it? Meaning,
Everybody says they're here, so
Oh. Yes, you are.
that's a change? Okay.
we still have a quorum though, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So do you want to, so we'll enter and continue to the 16th?
yeah.
Wait. Oh, so I was looking at 14, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that motion is to enter and continue both the public hearing as well as the consideration of the request this evening to April 16th.
Agreed.
At 7:30. And do we need a second? Somebody? Okay, and we're okay with that? So then we need, any comments? Okay, we need a roll call on that?
Mr. Baloo?
Yes.
Ms. Cotton?
Yes.
Mr. Hesner?
Yes.
Mr. Heidner?
Yes.
Mr. Mulcrone?
Yes.
Mr. Gorog?
Yes.
Chairman Morse?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank
So-
you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. The other item we have this evening is approval of the minutes from the February 26th, 2014 meeting. I was in here, so they look good to me.
The only comment I had, I don't know if you put these in other minutes, but I just happened to notice it in these. You didn't mention that we swore in the people testifying. Do you?
We usually put we swore at them, but
You're on tape here.
He's getting slapped.
sometimes, yes, we can add it if you'd like, so.
Okay, anything
I
else?
just didn't notice. I never noticed that.
Then we have a motion to approve that. We need a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed to that? No one's opposed, that passes.
Thank
I
you.
abstained because I wasn't there. Anything else we need to talk about other than to adjourn?
No, I think we're all set for tonight.
Okay, then we have a motion to adjourn. We need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed to that? We're adjourned. Good night.